As humans, we're able to process death when we know, no matter how tragic it can be. When a family knows, they can process that and they can begin to move on. When a family doesn't know, it's brutal.
I would much rather a kid be in the drunk tank in a jail overnight, safe with a public intoxication charge, and be alive.
That's one of the most suspicious things about Sebastian's case. When you have a young child out there, they're easily taken advantage of. And we have a lot of really nasty people out there.
We have a great guest. You might remember him from his involvement in finding Kiely Rodni. Now, for those of you who weren't in the true crime community or perhaps just didn't follow the case, Kiely Rodni was a young teen girl who was at a huge party. And she left that party in her vehicle, never to be seen again. Law enforcement, volunteers, everyone was searching for Kiely Rodni's car and for Kiely Rodni. When they exhausted all search efforts and law enforcement threw up their hands and said, she is not in these nearby waterways, we're done searching them. They reached out to Doug Bishop and the crew, and they came on scene, and literally in no time, they locate Kiely Rodni's car, and most sadly, did they locate Kiely Rodni, who was deceased, drowned in her vehicle, unable to escape. But we are fortunate to have Doug Bishop here, who was so involved in that and has been involved in multiple vehicle recoveries and investigations that have solved so many missing persons cases. Intro portion, I talked all about you, how we first came together through the Kiely Rodni, and how we continue to talk about different cases. You know, I'll give you a call as an example with Christian Martinez. As you know, I just reached out to you about the most recent case with Riley.
In these active cases, you always have to hold hope that they're going to be found alive. No matter what the circumstances are, you always want to hold out hope. And that's important when you're searching and when we're fighting for answers, you know, on any level of the aspect pertaining to the case. An onlooker and so forth, like you have to hold out hope that this person is going to be found and found safe in some form or another. That wasn't the case. He was found deceased in the Cumberland River, which runs directly through city center of Nashville. It's a horrible outcome. It's tragic, but it is a miracle that they found him. It really, really is. The Cajun Navy's response and the other organizations that were there, I know they're getting a lot of bad flack because of it, but the average person doesn't understand what it takes to look for a needle in a haystack. It's really easy to judge these searches and these cases from our couches. And when you involve adverse environments and so forth, such as rivers, waters that are not nice, the Cumberland River right now is not a place you want to be in. The temperatures, the current, and the terrain that's on the bottom of that Cumberland River is no joke. I've been there. I was there quite a few years ago, and we pulled out 17 vehicles from there. So I know firsthand exactly how the Cumberland River is. Hats off to everybody who was out there on the river, really, really pounding it really hard to bring answers to that family. And that's what's important, because this case didn't go cold. As humans, we're able to process death when we know, no matter how tragic it can be. You know, you can imagine the worst cases that you've ever been a part of with the FBI. When a family knows, they can process that and they can begin to move on. When a family doesn't know and they have no answers, it's brutal. I mean, that can't even really be put into words what that's like. And we're not meant to go through that as humans. So the important thing here is to thank God that the family has answers now. Anytime you have a tragic situation like this, what can we learn from it? No matter what the situation is, what can we learn from it? How do we be better as searchers, as a community, and so forth? Well, my biggest thing is there has to be some accountability by local Broadway establishments to take better care of people when they leave establishments unable to care for themselves. Take Riley's case and help the future victims who are going to go missing from Broadway. In New Orleans, they have a beautiful camera system set up in this abundantly huge tourist place to prevent crimes. But when crimes take place, they can track down the answers. Had there been an amazing system like there is there and also overseas, this would have been narrowed down much quicker.
It was amazing when I was seeing how easy it is to get into a 45-degree drop off going almost straight down. 80-degree, it looked like at some point straight into that Cumberland. What do you think about that?
Why is there that easy of an access? Knowing you have a strip where it's common for the average person to be drunk, intoxicated, there should be huge curved fences on the top of those walls. Right now, there's just, I believe, like waist high walls there. You know, whether you walk across the bridge or you walk down the waterfront right there opposite of the stadium, the Titan Stadium, you know, it's a steep drop. It is a very steep drop down into there. And obviously Riley ended up there at this time we're having this conversation. There's still things that have to be done with the medical examiner and so forth. I'm really curious to hear what the medical examiner's findings is going to be. That's going to be really important in this. Right now, we don't know. They just found his body yesterday. By the time this comes out, I'm sure we will know. Does he have water in his lungs? Are there any other injuries to his body? As an investigator from, you know, your background and from my background, I have to never count out what may or may not happen. Because the second you discount a conclusion on a case, you lose track of finding answers. Until you can definitively rule something out, nothing is ruled out. How did he end up in the water? I think it's really, really important for the Nashville community, which is an amazing community, to learn from this and to make improvements and to learn. With mistakes create rules, failures create wisdom, and that's what needs to come from this scenario, no matter what happened. And definitely there needs to be some better safeguards from those bars down there.
And this is not to point fingers, because I believe his fraternity brothers that were with him for the rest of their lives will hurt deeply. But I think another just reminder in social media, mainstream media, at every point, buddy system, do not leave that friend alone.
So true. You hit it spot on. You go out as a group, you stay together as a group, you communicate as a group, and that's really important. And if you're going to go out in a group, designate one person. And if you can't designate one person in this scenario, I get it. It's Nashville. Your whole group wants to go out and party, whether it's Uber or Lyft, taxi, you name it. You got to check those boxes to be responsible for yourself and the group you're with. Making sure the communication is there. Sometimes groups split up. Oh, we're at this bar. We're at that bar. We're leaving. Okay, you're leaving? Well, who's with you? Where's this person? Or where's that person? Like tracking. Tracking is key.
There is something that goes on. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the goal is to what they call drink to blackout. I've heard kids discuss it. Unfortunately, seen kids in that state multiple times, and it's the goal. The goal is the reason we're seeing so many of these young men, and it's typically young men in water. Brendan Santo, Christian Martinez, I could name Brian Bone. This is just off the top of my head, and there's dozens more. Have you seen this?
I've heard a lot about it, and it is popular among younger, 25 younger. And we're mainly talking about, fraternities and college groups and also high school students. It's popular. Kids nowadays are really extreme. Social media has raised the current generation. What I mean by that is a lot of most parents don't have absolute influence over their children like previous generations. If your child has a smartphone, They have a tablet. If they have a PlayStation or Xbox, you do not have absolute influence over your child. Therefore, they're learning from an online AI community per se of what it is to be normal, how they judge their actions, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to act, and so forth. And that's a whole new animal of boundaries within this new generation. Were contacted right away by so many people. And that's amazing because that's how I've been able to help solve the cases that I've been able to help solve in the past. Sebastian's case is a unique one because he's autistic, and no autistic child is the same. So when you talk about somebody that's missing and developing a victimology profile, lost person behavior profile, all the profiles that we use on our end on the professional side to who is this person, how do we look for this person, how do we find the suspect, and so forth. It's kind of hard. Every area is different. Every department has different resources. Every state has a different level of resources. Everybody that I have found are in areas that have been searched already. Everybody's capabilities are different. Every team has their own unique specialty and what they're used to. There's really no rhyme or reason to search and rescue other than the textbook, but the textbook only gets you but so far. Outside of that, you have to use the wisdom that you've obtained in the field. How much of that have you had? In a lot of different areas, the resources that are sent out in departments are in ancillary duties in these scenarios. They're not necessarily used to taking on these types of responsibilities. They're just assigned in these scenarios. Not a lot of experience when you talk about really digging into a search area. In the Kiely Rodni case, we know there was a lot of mistakes made because there were so many agencies involved, and the reporting back to commanders were inaccurate and so forth. And so things were overlooked, things fell through the hole, and all of that. All of that. In Sebastian's case, he wandered off, obviously. You have a lot of the internet, which is amazing in these cases, in finding answers and also creating drama. And that's just a side effect of these cases online. The things that are tied to the stepfather and so forth and whatnot. You gotta understand, these people aren't used to being in front of cameras. They're not used to answering these kind of questions. They're not influencers. They're not actors. They're not prepped for this. No one is prepped, especially a loved one, to lose their loved one. And when you put them in front of cameras, 90% of the time, things are going to seem off, which is why it really takes trained individuals, like yourself and other law enforcement that are taking these, lie detectors and these interrogations to be able to set those things aside and judge, yeah, that's just the normal stuff we get from somebody who's not used to being in an interrogation room and is dealing with the most worst grief of their life, losing a loved one and not having answers. You feel like you're a suspect, and law enforcement has to go through the motions. And when somebody goes missing, you know what? It is most likely somebody that's connected to that person. That's where law enforcement starts their investigation. And then they have to move out. And it's a process of elimination there as well. So whoever was around Sebastian at the time is a suspect until ruled out. When you have a young child out there that's wandering around who is technically mentally handicapped, they're easily taken advantage of. And we have a lot of really bad, nasty people out there. It's a process of elimination on the suspect side, but also the search side. A lot of the law enforcement dive teams, they have risk matrices. Diving community is one that is drilled on absolute safety. I can tell you right now, if I would have listened to any of that stuff,
you wouldn't find anybody.
Sort of, yeah. A lot of the stuff that I do is so dangerous. A lot of dive community, they don't like me. I'm not a scuba diver. I violate everything that's taught in those scuba schools. And that's what it kind of takes to produce answers, especially in a case like this, in Sebastian's case, where someone has gone missing for so long. Authorities, multiple agencies have run the course. If you want to try to do something that hasn't been done by anybody else, you got to be willing to do something that hasn't been done. I don't have a law enforcement background. I've learned on every case that I've gone through. Every case is different. Every search is different. And I try to take that wisdom through my successes and my failures are far beyond my successes. I've learned to be careful with speculating too much in one direction. I've learned to be really level-headed, never discount something, and never focused on just one angle. Although I'm not looking for suspects when I do what I do, I'm looking for the where, not the how or the why. Theorizing for me on the how and the why a lot of times leads me to the where they are. Keeping an even head and not ruling anything out just really improves the odds of finding. Watching their behaviors, their mannerisms, and the characteristics that they've displayed during a lot of the interviews, I didn't really see anything alarming. Obviously, some things that are said, like I said earlier, when you take normal people from middle class, lower caste society, no matter where they're at on the economic scale, that aren't used to being in front of the camera or a microphone, they're gonna say things that are going to be suspicious, and they're going to come off awkward eventually, the more they're on camera. I've watched a lot of what they've done with social media influencers, the interviews and the news interviews. It's nothing alarming, nothing like, okay, they're hiding something, they're suspicious, or that didn't add up, or they're lying based upon things that are known. And law enforcement really hasn't been too aggressive with them based on this case. So internally, whatever the local PD has gone through, they seem to be satisfied with the parents and the initial household.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And certainly law enforcement is being very quiet.
As they should.
As they should. I mean, that's the Bureau mantra. Normally, the locals are much more chatty. The Bureau never says a word even after the case is over. It is what's best for the case.
Not to sound cocky or arrogant or anything, if I haven't searched it, it hasn't been searched when I am there. So if I were to come into the area today, nothing that's been done before me, I would ever take into account based upon all the cases that I've helped solve for areas multiple agencies have already searched.